All right, welcome everybody to Commitments. We're doing security workflow, ensure confidential data not shared with Edward Haletky, and he's at TextIWill on Twitter. Just some quick show notes. Jumping on the conversation using the hashtag vBrownbag, and you see the recorded episodes will be uploaded shortly right after we end. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Edward.
Thank you very much, Maud.
And there you go.
Hello, everybody, and my name is Edward Haletky. I'm with the virtualization practice, an analyst firm, but I'm a technologist, author, security guy, I guess. But I've been dealing with virtualization for a very long time. But what we've been finding with going to the cloud is that there's been a huge number of issues where API keys have leaked out, and that has cost people serious amounts of money. Somewhere is upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars as people scan GitHub for those API keys. So what I'm showing you right now is kind of a workflow that I put together for adding security into an agile environment. We're going to look at one part of this, but I figured I'd go over the whole thing with you so you have it. The first part is we have our developers, our infrastructure security, we got our QA test people. They're all putting code into some form of source code management system like Git or GitHub. And then they go into a build server to build it. We store everything in an artifact repository. And then we use an orchestration server to do some testing and then maybe deploy out the application, react to APM, application performance management tools, monitoring tools to determine if there's problems, enter those into a Scrum backlog. We choose which backlog elements will be put to the sprint, and then we repeat the process. Now, there's a lot of testing that can be done with this process, and a lot of security testing, and that's what we're really talking about here and why I did this. But we're going to be talking about what's in the upper right and left part of this document. And that is basically, for GitHub, there is an ability to add a pre-commit hook. In other words, as you commit things, it can do some sort of analysis to determine whether or not API keys are there. And if those API keys are there, it should probably say, hey, don't allow anything to go. And then log what's happening so that people can find out, who's leaking the keys or leaking PII or PCI. Maybe have some more training about this. But the idea is to prevent people from putting those keys out into GitHub, which is publicly accessible, and that's where we're losing a lot of money and we're leaking all that. But I've gone one step further, and that is I'm not only looking for API keys and passwords, I'm actually looking for PII and other credential leakage, so that what we can do is basically analyze the code that we're planning to commit to determine if there's problems. So if you go out onto GitHub, you can see I have this thing called AAC-lib. That's going to be my library of tools from my consultancy. And this is called the Git pre-commit. And it's the only one up there right now. And it's just a simple script that I wrote about in my foray into Jenkins, Docker, Git, and Photon's set of posts. You can go and read those if you want. It's right here in the description. And using some testing with Ixia. But the idea here is we want to look for various things. I'm looking for IP addresses because in certain cases, putting the IP address up there will give an internal IP address, and the bad guys want that just as much as they want the API keys. Looking for specific domain names like user added domain would be a bad one to put out there. Looking for passwords or basically hashes of any type. And API keys, which is a number of different types of hash mechanisms. And I'm also looking for certain amounts of PII. Personally identifiable information. In this case, I'm looking for US data. So social security number, credit card numbers for various credit cards, passport card numbers, US phone numbers, and in this case, the Indiana driver's license. Why Indiana? I could have done Texas or Indiana. It didn't make a difference. But I went to this reference to get all this information. That's kind of what was there at the time, so I just took an hour, wrote a script, and then added more to it. This script is pretty easy to install. The main thing is you want to put it in your Git core templates as pre-commit, or put it in each repository in .git/hooks as pre-commit. And what that does, excuse me, what that does is, choking here, what that does is allow you to run this script, and I'll show you the script in a second, every time you do a commit. It's the simplest way to do that. And putting it in the templates means that every time I initialize a repository, that becomes part of the hooks, and it's built right in so that when I init a repository for a new project, I get this pre-commit hook as well. If I clone one, it should be able to get it as well. And that way I'll be able to have everything there. If you need help, there's an email address there. So the script, really straightforward. It's just called pre-commit, and it's basically a bunch of checks. You know, I'm looking for hashes, PII, IP addresses, and it's using some Git tools like git diff index, which is basically saying what's changed, and for every file that's changed, go ahead and run through these tests. So that's the key thing here, is to use that particular part of Git. This is a shell script. It's just running through them, doing a bunch of checks, counting up the number of issues, and then outputting the various issues. And the key here is, the other thing that's in this script that's actually kind of nice is this logger. And what that's saying is the user that submitted this, or tried to submit it, gets logged to var log messages on the case of Unix systems or a system event log. This is a shell script, so you would actually be on Linux or Unix systems for now, but you can put it on anything. And what this is doing is saying, hey, I want to log this because this could be a compliance issue. I want to know who's leaking the keys. I want to know why they're leaking the keys. Maybe they leaked them and then forced it out, which you can still do. So I want to be able to get some information for compliance reasons. I may want to do that just because I want to know what I attempted in the past so I can make sure I don't do it again, which would be a good thing to know. As I said, it's pretty straightforward. If you need anything added, please let me know, and I'll be glad to look into that. So without further ado, let me close this down. I'm hoping everybody can see my screen.
Yes.
And I'm going to run a simple thing. Now, in this particular directory, this is the full local, my library that I haven't put out yet. If you look in the hooks directory, is the pre-commit script. If you look in the .git hooks is pre-commit. It's also a bunch of samples, but the only thing that's really needed is right here. That is that script. No changes to it. And this is actually a few things. I mean, there's a get IP, which is basically communicating with the vCenter server to say, give me the IP of this particular VM that I gave you a name of. And I'm going to get the first one, or a number of them. Get creds is actually getting the credentials out of the VI credentials file, and everybody should know what a VI credentials file contains. It contains wonderful little things like passwords. And if I could spell, and it gets a password entry. Now you can copy that down and try to break it if you want, but please don't. In fact, I'll probably change it after this, but the idea is that is a password. Now, because it's a password, it should never go into GitHub. It should never go in anywhere unless it's encrypted. This is not encrypted. An encrypted password would look a lot different. And there's other ways we need to do this. Like, for example, I could use a KMIP server to store the credential, communicate with it, get the credential, and then log in and do what I need to do for the particular user. This is not something useful the way it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a line to the end of the credentials file, just because. So I add the line to it. And now I'm going to do git add vi credentials. And then I'm going to say git commit. Since I only want to do that one, it's going to say a number of things. It didn't like this. It says I cannot continue due to an IP in the file. Well, there is an IP in the file, the IP of my vCenter server. I can't do because I got a domain user. Yeah, there's a domain user in there. And it can't do because I have a couple different password hashes. And I'm actually doing a couple different things here. So it's actually picking up multiple password hashes and reporting on each one. So it didn't actually put it in commit. It didn't commit it. Because it didn't commit it, it says I can't do this. Now there are ways to get around this, but that's not something you really want to do. So I'm going to tail the last 3 lines of our log messages. Oops. I'm going to grep for various things, I should say. Let's just say VI credentials. And you can see I attempted to put those things in there. Now, I'm going to have a talk with myself because now I cannot commit. I should not be putting anything in here with credentials in it. That would be a really bad idea. Now, this is a local Git server, but if this was GitHub, this would be catastrophic. It would allow people to get in as the proper user and possibly even log in and break into my system. If this was out on Amazon, it could be a publicly addressable server, or Azure and so forth. So that would be a bad idea. So that's all it did. And that's basically the tool. It's not that hard to use. It took me about an hour to set up, but all the instructions are on the page. And if you need to, they're also in the README. And also in here where you can go and look for what's out there. Now this actually started as the pre-commit sample. That's where I got the get diff that you had to use here at the top of this thing. You need to do user bin get diff index. That's where I got that, and cached head. In other words, get me the head and look for everything that's different. And that, my friends, is all there is to adding a pre-commit skip hook into Git. For GitHub, Git, local, whatever you want to use it for. Are there any questions?
Does anybody have any questions? Doesn't look like it.
Doesn't look like it.
But yes, you want me to unmute you? Doesn't look like that either.
Is there anything you think we should add into this?
No, this was good.
Now the main thing is by looking at this as a workflow, and by the way, this will be published shortly. The idea is to add security in so that developers can continue doing their jobs without being impacted by everybody else. In this case, the pre-commit hook right up here. When I do that, I can actually look for various things. And we haven't talked about the rest of this, and that's a whole different story. And I have talked about it and written a few posts about it. But if you really want to find out more about why I did this, you can read the posts that are up for my foray into Jenkins, Git, and so forth. Thank you very much.
With that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.